If you're following this channel, you already know that the S24 has two versions, Snapdragon and Exynos. You probably also know that Samsung recently launched OneUI 7. A lot of you asked that I test the S25 versus S24 Exynos versus S24 Snapdragon for battery, camera, and performance after this major update. And as always, your wish, my command. I'm Mo, and I think this test is going to surprise you as much as it surprised me. All phones are charged to 100% with the same brightness using a lux meter and connected to the same Wi-Fi and 5G network while updated to the latest version of OneUI 7. You can also see the battery life and temperature of the phones using the app that I wrote, which I still didn't have time to publish unfortunately. Starting with performance, I ran the Geekbench test, which tests the chipset. The S25 with a Snapdragon 8 Elite scored much higher than the other two phones. The S24 Snapdragon got a slightly better score, but it was very close to the S24 Exynos. All three phones also had a similar temperature, which is a win for the S25 since it delivers more power with the same energy usage. Then I ran the 3D Mark test, which tests the graphic unit. The S25 got 6400, the S24 Snapdragon got 4900, and the S24 Exynos got 4200, which is lower than the Snapdragon variant. For the third and last performance test, I ran the AnTuTu benchmark. This is the most comprehensive benchmark as it puts the phones through various tests for both CPU and GPU. It was a bit surprising that the S24 Exynos finished the test faster, and that's why the phone is cooler, since it had time to cool down while the other phones were still running the test. The S25 scored around 2.2 million, the S24 Snapdragon got around 1.8 million, and the S24 Exynos got 1.4 million. In general, it does seem to me that Samsung toned down the performance of the S24 Exynos to battle overheating. Now, all phones have a similar battery percentage. I'll now briefly talk about OneUI 7 and my favorite features. My absolute favorite feature is the AI Select. You can use it in any app that you want, and it does a lot of useful things, including making a wallpaper out of an image or creating a GIF. But for me, the most useful one is copying text in apps where you usually can't, like YouTube comments or Reddit, and also translating them. This is a game changer, and I use this feature often. The other big change is that now, if you swipe from the left side, you go to the notification center, but if you swipe from the top right corner, you go to the quick settings. Another welcome visual change is the new widgets. I like how they look, even though they look suspiciously similar to iOS ones. In the camera app, there are two changes that are very useful for me. One, you can go to settings and activate shooting in log profile. If you're a content creator and want to color grade your footage, this is a great feature. The second feature that I really like is the new filter system for pictures, which gives an extra touch to your images. You can define them however you want. Now all phones have 87% battery left. I left the phones overnight on standby and went to sleep. By the time I woke up, the S25 had 2% more battery than the other two, but none lost any alarming amount of battery. I'm going outside with Tanya for cycling, and we'll put all three phones to track the activity using Komoot. We cycled for around half an hour to get to the cherry blossoms in the Japanese garden on the island, while all phones were connected to 5G and GPS activity tracking was on. We were reviewing the Tourmaline e-bike, and I should admit it was one of the most fun products I've ever reviewed, so stay tuned until we publish that video. Even though all of them are running the same OneUI 7 and they all have the same camera system, since the processor is different and part of the image processing happens on the hardware level and through libraries, the pictures and videos are going to be different. For the ultra-wide angle, they all produce a similar amount of detail. Like always, the S24 Exynos is more contrasty than the rest. On the main lens, we can see the same. S25 and S24 Snapdragon are close to each other, while the S24 Exynos is very contrasty and more sharpened. On the 3x zoom, the white balance was different. The S25 and S24 Snapdragon were warmer, while the S24 Exynos was a bit colder, but there were no difference in terms of detail. On 10x zoom, the S25 was adding more sharpness compared to the S24 Snapdragon, and the S24 Exynos was more contrasty. This contrasty look sometimes makes the pictures pop more, like this one on the S24 Exynos. It is not necessarily a good or bad thing, just a different style. For video, I would say the skin tones on the S25 S24 Snapdragon were more accurate, and on the S24 Exynos, Tiny appears more pale. Also, the grass is more vivid on the Snapdragon versions compared to the Exynos. One UI 7 supports shooting in log, which is a flat color profile that you can color grade. Here, I'm using the default lookup table from Samsung without changing any settings to keep things fair. The S25 giving absolutely great colors, super neutral and lovely. The S24 Snapdragon is also doing well. I'm shooting on auto, and here the footage is more exposed compared to the S25. For some reason, the footage I got from the S24 Exynos was like this, and I can only assume this is something that needs to be fixed by Samsung because the highlights are absolutely clipped. When we put them side by side, you can see the difference between the log footage of these three phones with the official lookup table provided by Samsung. In general, I'm happy that they decided to roll out log for older phones. Apple would never do this. We cycled back home for another half an hour to an hour, and I continued with the test. The GPS tracking was on during the whole time we were out. Now the S25 is at 75%, S24 Snapdragon at 70%, and S24 Exynos at 69%. Nice. All phones are now connected to Wi-Fi, and I started a YouTube stream on all of them. YouTube streaming and watching any kind of social media is super power efficient. For example, right now the phones are using on average 1 watt of energy, while if you play games or do video calls, they are used 3 to 4 watts. That's why measuring battery life based on the screen on time is flawed. When the YouTube stream ended, the S25 was ahead, but both S24 models were at the same percentage, which is surprising based on our historical data. I then put all phones to capture 4K video at 60 frames per second. What was extremely surprising is that the S24 Exynos stayed as cool as the other two phones during this test. Based on our previous test with One UI 7, the S24 Exynos would heat up faster than the other two. By the end of the test, the S24 Exynos got hotter and dimmed the screen. Now the S25 is around 6% ahead. I let the phones cool down and play this aquarium video with bunch of fish. Now all phones are connected to 5G instead of Wi-Fi. This time, the Exynos was not able to run as many frames as the other two. The S25 stayed at 60 frames per second, the S24 Snapdragon at 52, and the S24 Exynos dropped to 46. As I mentioned, I have a strong feeling that the performance of the S24 Exynos is reduced to get better battery and thermals, but I don't have actual proof of that. To run batteries to zero, I ran the mother of all tests, which is Google Meet on 5G. Right now, both S24 variants are going shoulder to shoulder. The Snapdragon variant stayed a degree or two cooler than the S24 global variant. The S24 Exynos suddenly started to lose battery faster, and I suspect this is due to the fact that this test heavily relies on data transfer, and we all know that the modem in Exynos is less efficient than Qualcomm's. The S24 Exynos lost the last few percentages faster than expected and left the chat at exactly 4 hours. Just as a quick note, I forgot to start the stopwatch once during this test, so the actual SOT or screen on time is slightly longer. Only 4 minutes later, the S24 Snapdragon dimmed the screen, which means the phone dropped below 5%. It went on for another 12 minutes and died only 12 minutes after the S24 Exynos. You could argue that this is the closest battle between the two S24 variants. Previously, the difference between them was higher on the One UI 6 version. The S25 is going strong, and the new efficient Snapdragon chipset is showing its power. Probably this one also has a couple of percent more simply because it was bought 1 year after the other two phones, and even though I only use these phones for testing, just storing phones in the cupboard reduces their battery capacity slightly. And finally, the S24 left the chat at 4 hours and 25 minutes. But I should say this test was closer than I expected. Overall, the S25 Snapdragon and S24 Snapdragon are both decent options. With the launch of One UI 7, apart from the better and more efficient processor, there is almost zero difference between these two phones. So if I were you and wanted to save some money, I would opt for the S24 Snapdragon. The S24 Exynos still has some hiccups, but the gap is now much closer than it was before One UI 6, and it seems a lot of problems are solved or being mitigated. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more camera samples and the comparison of these phones with the previous One UI 6, watch this video next. Thanks for tuning in to Techno, and I will see you in the next one.